Hassan Minhaj can't screw up. I mean, no, his research can't be off, because otherwise he'll be teaching millions of people the wrong thing. Now, like, not only do you have the pressure of being a good entertainer, but you also have the pressure of getting people educated on certain issues just because of the way it is now. We are talking about comedy and politics. Ojus, this is something that you really wanted to talk about, and I think it's really fascinating. We were actually going to talk about this last time, but we had planned out so many things related to this topic that we just kind of thought there's enough here for there to be an entire episode. But Ojus, what are your thoughts on politics and comedy right now? I mean, do you think that it has as much of an effect as some people think, or do you think that it should have more of an effect? What do you think the effect is?
Yeah, so comedy and politics, it's one of those things where we believe that there isn't as much of an effect as there really is. I think we kind of downplay the effects, but I think that there's something to be said about how much politicians kind of go on things like late night shows, how much they appear on SNL. I don't think they wouldn't do these appearances if it didn't benefit them politically at all. And so I think there is something to be said for like an effect in terms of comedy and politics. And I think part of it might be that a lot of politics, especially now in our kind of 24-hour hyper news cycle, where people kind of don't pay a ton of attention to politics, but still like watch a lot of the news and things like that. And it's that politics has kind of become about name recognition. So kind of like if people know who you are, if people see you a lot on like late night shows and on SNL, and if you're, if you have a lot of publicity things, then it's easier for people to see you, to, I guess, relate to you, and they're automatically then more likely, I think, to vote for you. I think that it's I think that things like SNL and stuff also can affect politics as well, which is something that very rarely goes noticed. But I think if you look at things like the Al Gore and Bush election, I do think, a lot of people might have varying opinions and things like that, but there is something to be said about the way that Al Gore was portrayed, and then how it probably cost him like those 500 votes in Florida. And we'll cover this particular instance a little bit more later. Another thing that comes to mind immediately is Sarah Palin. I know that a lot of people in the Democratic Party were just like shit scared of Sarah Palin. I don't want to get demonetized, but they were really scared of Sarah Palin before Tina Fey basically single-handedly took her down with her whole impression. And so, I think because comedy comes from this place of, everything's in humor, everything's in jest, we're more likely to maybe not take it seriously on its face, but it definitely leaves a message with us, leaves a mark with us, and that does have an effect on how we view our politicians and even how we view different policies and things like that.
Yeah, we got into it last time with social media, but how people do look at things that are just easily accessible to them and use that to guide a lot of what they think about certain things. And with comedy, it's very similar, but it's in the same way that movies and TV shows are like that, right? Where, if you see a lot of, I don't know, for example, just a Netflix show that happens to have Asian Americans, or that happens to have Indians in it, a lot of people would watch it, and then I was actually just watching this morning with my family. I was watching this arranged marriage show on Netflix, it's not good. But anyways.
Oh my God, is this the Indian matchmaking one?
Yeah, it is.
Oh my God, bro.
But anyways, I was watching that, and and it's so clear that the only people, and it actually got a lot of controversy for this, but a lot of most basically every character in the movie was, or in the show was a, was a Brahmin, was from a certain caste, was a good Jew, right? I mean, so there's, India, for example, if we're taking India, for example, it is like Europe in its diversity, right? Where you have like 22 different languages and you have all these different cultures, one family to the next. I mean, it's like night and day how different they are. Um, but Netflix will make this show and it passes off as diversity because they can show a non-white family, and everybody watching it will look at it and it'll be their representation of an Indian family, right? Just generally Indian. And so they'll see, the weddings, and they'll say, oh, every Indian wedding could be that. And I'm not underestimating um, how intellectually curious people are, the viewers. But at the same time, though, it is true. I mean, it is in the top 10 of all shows on Netflix right now. So I mean, it clearly has some appeal, and so this is something that we shouldn't underestimate. And I think we're seeing the same effect with the Daily Show and with Hassan Minaj, with John Oliver. A lot of these shows will still spread around Facebook, um, and they'll be used as sources for a lot of what people have to say about politics and whatnot. And whether that's a good thing or not is up for debate. But yeah, the truth is that it's there. And you talked about Tina Fey. Um, I actually had read that the show during that time, during the 2007 2008, um, during that presidential run, the SNL had reached its highest Nielsen rating since 1997 during that period when she was impersonating Sarah Palin. And I remember Sarah Palin as Tina Fey as Sarah Palin more than I remember Sarah Palin herself. And I think when I would back then I was quite young, but when I would hear about Sarah Palin, I had the image of Tina Fey as Sarah Palin in my
Yeah.
head. I almost didn't even know what she looked like. Um, but SNL really they had gained a lot more viewers, and this was also in the 2016 election, with Trump and with Alec Baldwin as Trump. They apparently obtained 2 million more viewers, and so and it's also actually, this is another thing I read, was that about 16% of viewers had shifted their positive opinions about Palin after Tina Fey, and that's the important part.
Right.
And so obviously, based on these poll results, there is a clear effect that these shows have, and SNL has been doing it for decades, since the 70s.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah, I think you hit on something that's really, really important there. And that is that, you know, even if we think it's all in jest, there are real consequences to this. And I am not a Sarah Palin fan at all, but, it is, there's something to be said about how SNL basically wrecked her, and wrecked her career and career chances and things like that.
yeah,
And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that we are kind of, we want to humanize our politicians, I think. Um, I have my own feelings about that. I personally don't believe that politicians really need to be humanized. Like, I don't care if Joe Biden takes the train to work, and I don't care that, I mean, I feel bad for him, obviously, that his, like, son died and his daughter died and his wife died and all of this. But if he doesn't support, legalization of drugs and stuff, even while his son has had drug issues in the past, I don't care about his personal life, to be honest. But we have this obsession kind of with humanizing politicians and of thinking of them as like one of us, and like they're not so different from what we are, kind of thing. And so when I think that sometimes when there isn't a platform for the politician or something to kind of speak back or talk back or engage in comedy as well, it kind of just becomes a reflection of the the whatever comedy constructs, whatever a comedian, whatever personality a comedian constructs around a particular politician, just ends up being like how the public views that politician. um,
yeah,
I think a really good example of this, and now we can talk about it, I guess, is the election between Al Gore and George W. Bush. And so I think one of the differences was that when Will Ferrell was doing George W. Bush, like we knew at the time that like Bush was not great with the English language. By the way, I'm saying we, but this is like before either of us were born. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
but Bush was not great with the English language, and so really it didn't change the public's opinion of him.
I
Like
guess we
it,
were born. We were just very young. Yeah,
yeah, we were really, really young, too young to understand politics.
yeah,
And so the impression like didn't do much to change the public's opinion. But for Al Gore, right, there was this slightly, superior repetition of like some of the words that Bush would say, and this kind of like holier, like kind of better than thou attitude.
yeah,
Really, I think as much as everyone would like to deny it, I think it did. And a lot of, comedians who look back on it say, yeah, it probably did cost Gore the Florida count. And it probably did cost Gore a lot of the votes that he otherwise would have gotten.
mm,
Because this, oh, he's not one of us, he's kind of better than us, more smug than us. People didn't, I guess, they didn't think that that was relatable, I guess.
yeah, yeah. SNL has always, I think, been one of the premier sources of political commentary or comedy, rather. I mean, it's yeah, not commentary because it's that would imply that it actually has something to say, but it was never meant to, right? It was meant they in the past they had made fun of every type of candidate,
Mm-hmm.
um, and we with Chevy Chase, who was one of the first, he was kind of like the first breakout star of
Yeah.
SNL in the '70s. Yeah, part of National Lampoon. But he made fun of Gerald Ford and and basically any political candidate that was coming up. And they also just they made fun. What was better is that they made fun of the art of they just made fun of politics as a whole. They made fun of the whole show. They made fun of the debates. They made fun as debates. And there was a lot of slapstick involved in that as well. But and that's definitely changed. I think maybe because our comedic uh, preferences maybe have changed as a society. But that's a whole other discussion about comedy itself. Uh, but but SNL was not the only show though, right? Because we had obviously we had what's his name, Johnny Carson,
Yeah.
who had actually done a lot of political commentary. Before that, there was Smothers Brothers and Bob Hope,
Yes.
and I don't know if we're going to go into them individually, but politics was always something that was present in comedy. But in some cases, like with the Smothers Brothers, there were consequences involved where they started to make songs about the Vietnam War because they were opposed to it, and then they basically got taken off the air.
Right.
Um, and and then and then later we had Johnny Carson, and we have Kimmel and Ferguson, and or no, I guess Ferguson's done, but sadly, but yeah, it's like we have Kimmel and Seth Meyers, Stephen Colbert, and these seem to be the most prominent people. I mean, those shows have essentially morphed, maybe not Kimmel as much, but Colbert's show has essentially morphed into a political show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and we forget that it was actually Letterman's show. It's the Late Show,
Right.
and not only is it politically driven, but a lot of it is basically geared towards one ideology, towards one side of the political spectrum. And you can say that with I think most of the mainstream politicians right now, where when you see like John Oliver and Hassan Minaj and Stephen Colbert, uh, they almost always, I mean, 99% of the time, they will, when they're making fun of a politician, they're making fun of a Republican or a conservative. Um, and, no matter what you think about that, that is the reality. And so that lack of bias that we saw earlier from SNL has started to erode for sure. I mean, I think it's completely gone at this point, but in the last few decades, over the last few decades, it's been eroding um, slowly. And I think that, once, I think in the 2000s, it had really, which was also when media started to get more subjective and started to get more opinionated. So maybe there's a correlation there, but we talked about that in the last episode. Um, but that's also when, yeah, I mean, SNL was clearly making fun of Bush, was clearly making fun of the individual, right? And was making fun of Palin.
SNL creates its own view on, like the personality of a politician, but also things like late shows, which kind of occupied what was late night news, right? So especially like Jon Stewart, like the Daily Show, it was supposed to just be a lot of this stuff just started out as like parody broadcasting, right? Which is what we saw with a lot of his students, people like Colbert and John Oliver and Samantha Bee and things like that. But it kind of it starts to morph, right? And Jon Stewart takes like a moral stance on a lot of these things like that are real issues, and so you do see the Daily Show take um, take a view on the news and on things that are happening. I don't think that that itself is an issue. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, it's normal for comedians to talk about things that they think are funny and that they think are passionate. A lot of comedians do tend to be more left leaning, which, I mean, you can't force comedy out of, like, if I don't know, if conservatives comedy doesn't appeal, I guess, to a lot of mainstream audience, like there's nothing you can do about that. I I don't know um if there's like a real if there needs to be necessarily some sort of um anti bias, I guess, or
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
in
Bias.
in comedy, because I think that that's what makes it interesting is that you're getting
Right.
someone's perspective. But we have to
Exactly.
keep it that way, right? It can't be that people take a lot of what they say on late night shows as the truth, because that's what I think a lot of the issue is, right? When you
Yeah.
see like Jon Stewart, when you are not, yeah, Jon Stewart, as much as I like Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, as you were saying, Hassan, John Oliver, it's that they're all coming at this with a perspective. And so while I do like a lot of John Oliver and Hassan Minaj's reporting, just because they tend to have like a large research team that's backing them as well. We have to still remember that this is someone's perspective. This is meant to be funny. This is not the news. If you're really interested in the news and you're interested in something that they say, go and look it up. Go and read more about it. But don't take what these comedians say as some form of gospel.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, politics is such a diverse field, I mean, just like any other field, I would say that I made sure to say that the mainstream comedians, or I guess I don't know, like the prime time, the ones who are more,
The popular
who are just, whose faces are seen, who are just more popular, nowadays are becoming more, are becoming, are the more liberal ones.
yeah.
Um, but I mean, there is a whole movement. There's a whole movement of comedians who are, of completely different viewpoints, which is great. And then a lot of them who don't do political comedy at all. I mean, Conan is somebody who, he'll do it sometimes, but generally um, he doesn't really like to imbibe, which I appreciate. And that goes into another question of like, how easy is the joke to actually make, and what is a good joke and what isn't? Because to me, like, that's really, at the end of the day, like, a good joke is a good joke, and in my opinion, I'm like, a good joke is a good joke and a bad joke isn't, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if I agree with you or not, but there are some jokes that are grounded upon opinions that I might disagree with that are great, that are like just well framed and just well delivered or whatever. And many times they're done with irony, and many times right. So there's so many different factors when it comes to political, actually, actually saying political jokes, that people have to take into account. Um, and then there's also this whole argument going on about free speech and about, what people should be able to say in comedy, and what people shouldn't be able to say. And I tend to be on sort of the extreme, where I'm just like, what we love about it, what, like you said, is that we're getting somebody's perspective on things. Um, but what I also like is that because comedy is so diverse, you could also do like the Mitch Hedberg thing, where you just kind of just say like random stuff, right? But it's funny too. And so, and then you have people like Seinfeld. Seinfeld is also somebody who's very pro, just, he's very, I guess you could say, anti censorship of comedy. right? Because if you want to go to a place where you want to agree with somebody or you want to feel like you're in a safe place, like that's comedy is just not that, and that never was. Comedy was always raw. It was always for kind of just even sometimes just letting out some things or just hearing somebody say things that you would never really say, or some things that you would never say in public, or the thing, because it's just it's the art form that allows for that type of freedom, right? And you don't have to stand up there and like it's not a political rally in that sense, right, where you're expressing agreement. It's
Right.
almost like you're expressing a sense of appreciation for it, right? Or you could be expressing agreement, but what laughing at a joke is that could be taken so many different ways,
Mhm.
right? But there are some, and that goes into other things about about like our particular sensibilities and what we find funny. When Trump says some stuff or when he tweets some things, like I laugh because it's like funny to me. Sometimes like some of the stuff he does is hilarious. Like when that person at some press conference said she was sick, and then he was like, "Oh," and he left. I thought that was so funny. And then he like and then that one time when he had the paper, and he was like, "Yeah, they said this thing on the paper," and he goes, "And they were wrong." And then he flicks the paper, like that's stuff like that, and then also his tweets and stuff.
Mhm.
you know, yeah, I'm not gonna high five him in the elevator, right? But I'm gonna laugh at something funny that he says, and that really anybody says.
It was, I think it was interesting where you were like, you know, they're like, because like comedians run this political gamut in terms of their ideologies, and that they're kind of center to like far left. There aren't a ton of right wing politicians, which I don't.
Right wing
Sorry, right
comedians.
wing comedians. That's
Yeah.
exactly
Yeah, I would say yeah. Like which I think is unfortunate, to be honest with you. Like I think that there is, though. Like there's some people, like Andrew Schultz and these people who are online and who are doing stand up. They're not really, I wouldn't say they're right wing. I wouldn't say they're conservative, but I would say that they're a little bit they push back more on like wokeness and stuff, and like SJ, on social justice and stuff like that. So in that sense, they are a little bit against the main, which is those are not things that you would see someone like Trevor Noah do,
right.
right? They have more like fringe opinions, I guess, or just more, just things that are not as, I guess, just caught, as mainstream, right? But yeah, but you're right though. There aren't any, because it's such a risk. I mean, at the end of the day, how many conservative artists do you know? I mean, how many conservative filmmakers are there, right? Who are part of the system? It's because it's not good for business to be, and that's a whole other thing as well. But that might be why we see such a lack of it.
But I think that you're kind of hitting on something that's kind of important, which is that there's a difference from being partisan and towing the party line, right? Like, you can be left leaning, but you don't have to make every plug or every joke about the Democratic Party and how
Exactly.
the Democratic Party is, which is what a lot of people like Trevor Noah and Stephen Colbert, and I mean, even Seth Meyers to a certain extent do, which is every joke, like you said, they make it at the expense of Republicans, and they
Yeah.
try to show Democrats in a good light. And
Yeah.
it's not that Democrats are inherently better than Republicans. I think there are a lot of like Republican populist can't like people out there who I do like some of their economic proposals,
Yeah.
but and there are a lot of dumb Democrats
Right.
that don't that aren't really that don't really represent the working people as much as they should. And so, that, but they don't make those kinds of jokes, right? Instead, what do you see? You see Larry David making jokes at the expense of Bernie Sanders. Things like, I remember there's this one joke, I can't remember what skit or what it was from, but I just remember it was Larry David, and it was a 2020 joke, and it was just Larry David. He gets this big applause as Bernie Sanders, and everyone is really, really, really happy to see him. And he's like, "Yes, I'm Bernie Sanders," and he's like, "And I cannot wait to screw this up again." And I was like, "Excuse me, what?" Like, it wasn't. it wasn't like making fun of like Joe Biden getting too close to women, where it's like, oh, ha ha ha, that's funny and also cute. It wasn't about how Kamala Harris got sidelined during the debates, even though she was not sidelined during the debates and she got a ton of talking time. And it was about, it was Maya Rudolph quoting Lizzo as Kamala Harris. Like, that is funny and that is making fun of those politicians, but it's not insulting in the way that Larry David was to Bernie Sanders. I don't know
Yeah.
if that makes sense. So there's a fine line between like calling out and criticizing and downright disparage and insulting. I don't think that comedians should be like they shouldn't be
Censored
uh,
or anything.
what?
Censored.
Yeah, censored. That's exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be censored or anything, and there shouldn't be any backlash for doing that. But it's important to notice that these are things that exist and that they do warp your perception. I think that when you were talking about Chevy Chase and kind of how Chevy Chase was imitating President Ford, and he just kind of kept falling over at
Right.
every 2 minutes.
Exactly.
I was watching this documentary, and there's a line from Kimmel where Kimmel just says like, I didn't know who Gerald Ford was. I just thought he was a fatuous idiot. And so it paints your perception before you've even gotten a chance to get to know this person. One of my favorite examples where I saw something like this was, it was I think a 2012 Open or something like that. It was Hillary Clinton. It was Amy Poehler playing Hillary Clinton.
Was it the debate?
No, this was when they introduced Barack Obama.
Oh, right. And when Barack was, well, he was actually there.
Yeah, and Barack Obama was actually there,
Yeah.
and Fred Armisen, I think, is playing Mike Gravel. And
Oh,
he
yeah,
says,
yeah, yeah.
oh God, and he says this thing where he's like, oh, I got some like duds or something. What is it, like chocolate
I
thing?
forgot, honestly. Yeah, maybe
And
some make it egg.
Amy Poehler takes it and she's like, oh, that's not chocolate, that is dog shit. And it was kind of one of those things where I had that same reaction that Kimmel did, which is that I didn't know who Gravel was. I just thought he was a fatuous idiot. And little did I know that Gravel has been this champion of economic policies for years. And he's just cast out of the main light. And instead, we let people like Elizabeth Warren and Hillary Clinton just hog the spotlight and get on all of these SNL skits, and they're allowed to create and craft their own image that then people like Kate McKinnon and Amy Poehler have to live up to.
This is the hypocrisy that I see now with especially with SNL, where it's like, I feel like their response to that would be, "Hey, we're making fun of everybody. That's the whole point, right?"
Right.
But at the same time, everything they did, and yeah, we talked about this in the last episode too.
I don't think we
But
talked about it in the episode. We talked about it in our own discussion.
oh, did we? Anyways, it was talked about, but the way that they would show the candidates were so clearly biased, right? It was so clearly favoring and giving more time to certain people who they knew would get more I don't know, more applause, would get more attention, whatever it was. um I mean, it comes down to trust at the end of the day, right? I mean, how much do we trust comedians with these opinions? And a lot of times, I think the reason we trust a lot of these people is because a lot of the people who watch comedy in general, I mean, and yeah, in the first place, are people who care about art, care about comedy and stuff. Like, you're not going to see many conservatives in the audience, and right, like the live audience of Trevor Noah's show. You just won't. Right, and that's why it's like anytime if he brings up Tommy Lahren or some other or like Ann Coulter or somebody,
Mhm.
um, they get boos, and they get like it's almost like entering a democratic rally,
Yeah.
because you're just surrounded with people who all think the same way, um, and so that's clearly used to their advantage, right? I mean, it's how they make all the money. It's not it's not a coincidence that every single new show that's coming out now has all of their highlight videos as like Trump doing something stupid, and then Trump as the main thumbnail,
Yeah.
right? Like, I was on YouTube, you can just go on it, and your whole recommended bar will just be like, Seth Meyers talks about something that Trump did. Hasan Minhaj talks about something that Trump did. Actually, no, Hasan Minhaj is better, but like, what's his name? John Oliver talking about something that Trump did. And so there's a reason why they're all doing it, right? I mean, they're pandering to their audience.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, these mainstream shows have a certain audience, and talking about Trump allows them to stay in that pocket.
I don't think it's even pandering to their audience after a certain point. It's pandering to the news companies that run them, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
and
where
that too.
is Seth Meyers? Where is Jimmy Kimmel? Or not Kimmel, Fallon. They're on
Fallon.
ABC. What
Yep,
about Stephen Colbert?
exactly.
He's on what, CBS?
Who? Colbert's on CBS. Yeah.
CBS. And
Yeah.
then who else? Who else is there? Trevor Noah is on Comedy Central.
Right.
And so again, it goes back to what we talked about in the last episode. This is what we talked about in the last episode, which was all of these big news corporations who have become conglomerates and who have all of these rich people who sit on their boards. And so all of the comedy has been used to basically appease them and be like, this is making jokes about people that are not you. And to a certain extent, I'm not sure like who runs HBO and who runs Netflix. I think that John Oliver and Hassan Minaj, just by the way of their show works, they're allowed to be a little bit more uncensored. Maybe I'm not even
Yeah.
sure how much more uncensored it is. I think it's because it's kind of they focus on one topic, and so because they do such a deep dive, it feels more informative to me.
Yeah, from what I've heard, Netflix is a little bit more like lax with some of that.
Yeah,
Yeah, which is why so many people flock to them. Yeah.
I'm not even 100% sure though, like how true that is.
Right. I mean, yeah.
And you said something else very interesting, which was that all of these people are very mainstream, and it made me realize that sorry, why do we listen to all of these comedians? And I was thinking about it, like, why do I listen to people like Seth Meyers? Why do I think his comedy is so funny? And it's like comedy in the end has to be relatable,
Yeah.
right? So there is something relatable and funny about his jokes, which is why I trust him. I shouldn't, but I do.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so I think that we somehow feel that people on SNL, people on the late shows are like us, and they're not like us, right? Not everyone was raised in Massachusetts and then went to fancy prep schools and then went to fancy private schools and things like that. And so you're gonna have that fancy prep school, fancy private school perspective only, right? I mean, Stephen Colbert, Seth Meyers are all from Northwestern. There isn't really a comedian that's out there now who is like part of the working people.
Yeah. I mean, because if you're part of the working people, there's a low chance you'd want to be a comedian.
Yeah,
um,
because you won't get the chance in the first place.
yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, yeah, and that's true. Um, but at the same time, like that shouldn't be a bad thing in the sense that we shouldn't. Yeah. Yeah. And you said that. But we should understand what the intent of the jokes are. We should understand where they're coming from and just like what it is because actually recently I was reading about this guy, this SNL writer. I'm not sure if he's still writing for SNL, but his name is Nimesh Patel. But he went to I think it was Columbia or something. It was one college where he was doing stand up for this one event. And he said this joke that basically got him kicked off stage. They got him booed, and it was this joke about he was doing it with good intentions. It wasn't like he's an Indian guy that he's just like he was just saying it as it was supposed to be a funny joke, and it was a funny joke. It was something about like it's like being gay. It can't. There's no way it's a choice because there are black people who are also gay. It's like you wouldn't be black and then like choose to be gay on top of it, right? Which is a funny joke, and it was funny, and it's done with good intentions, right? He's like, if anything, it's with good, like really good intentions, because he's the one who's acknowledging that it is hard
Yeah,
to be gay. It is hard to be black.
it's a real thing.
It's a real thing, and he got literally they cut his mic, they kicked him off stage, and um, to me, it's like if first of all, like what are you standing for by doing that? I don't understand. And also, like, are you not? I mean, like, isn't it an infringement on your speech then to like to actually do that? I mean, to cut someone off and to throw them off stage. First of all, without acknowledging the fact that he didn't say anything hurtful.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that he brought up certain marginalized groups was enough,
Yeah.
right? That was what kind of irked me about that in the first place. But I think those are the stories that a lot of comedians are scared of, and it's why a lot of comedians shy away from college campuses now. because they don't want experiences like that. They feel like a comedy club, um, where there are adults sitting in the audience instead, and they're just drinking and having a good time. That's a better audience, to retain, I guess, what comedy was always meant to be, which is just the freedom to express the statements that might be bad, that might be incongruous to many people's beliefs, but to um, but to say it anyway, if it's done well, and have it deliver and have it worked on. Um, and it's not even like it was offensive in that setting. It wasn't. But again, I mean, it's just certain people have been reacting to certain jokes, differently nowadays, right? And I think maybe that is also why it's given rise to this new era of the mainstream comics, who are a little bit more clean, a little bit more like benign with their delivery and with things like that. I mean, you wouldn't see George Carlin doing stuff now. I mean, I wish he was still alive, just to see what he would think about everything. Um, but but it's very hard to imagine a world where somebody, a comic like him, is still able to do things.
Yeah, I think that I don't think that comedians are necessarily benign. I actually think they've kind of been weaponized. So they'll be benign to people kind of who are on their side, but they
Mm.
won't be so benign to people who are not on their side.
I mean, I
Um,
think just in terms of the jokes themselves, like you wouldn't see them pushing the edge too often on like live TV, on the mainstream. Like you would never see Trevor Noah saying something too edgy or too, unpopular, even if it's a good joke. I don't feel like I see that. I don't think I see that in his stand up either. But I think that maybe because of the financial incentives, the companies that have
right.
these, the network companies, the people who are distributing their specials and then maybe even being on Netflix, who knows, despite maybe having some freedom. Um, but also a lot of these comedians who have these personas, like the reason why Trevor Noah wouldn't do that is because it'll hurt his brand.
Right, exactly.
People won't treat him the same way, right? Ellen can't go up there and then say a bunch of dick jokes anymore, even though she might have before she had her show.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Um, you make an interesting point about like comedians refusing to play at colleges and stuff because they can't get it right, which kind of it seems a little incongruous to me in that comedians are always saying that you have to bomb, you have to like fail, and you have to do badly. But the minute that they like big comedians fail and do badly, it's somehow
I mean, but it's why they're doing badly though, right? Like there's therefore doing badly because your jokes are bad in terms of like they're just not well written. Like when you're an up and coming comic and you're going to different clubs and then you're bombing because you're a novice and you don't really know what's going. Like you don't have stage presence really.
yeah,
You're just bad. You haven't formed it yet.
right,
That's just part of your craft. But it's like if I'm a jazz musician and I go to like a pop concert, like a Taylor Swift concert, and then everyone's like, "Boo, I don't get this." That's not me being like, "Oh, it's my fault." It's like it's just like that's something that's not really in my control at all, and that's so I think that it is a little bit of a different environment too, because like Seinfeld can go up there and say things and then bomb, and it's not because he hasn't done well or he hasn't crafted his jokes well enough, like he's done it long enough, right? But it's because of the people that are there, I guess, the change in sensitivity to certain jokes. And I'm sure there were a lot of people there who didn't want him to be kicked off stage. In Nimesh Patel's case, I'm sure there were a lot of students, maybe most of the students even, were fine with him saying those jokes. But I mean, I guess the fact that there's this brand or like that, whatever. I think it was the organization that invited him on campus thought that it was too offensive.
yeah. The idea of censorship in comedy is just, I mean, that's not what comedy is supposed to be, right? Comedy is where you can speak the truth, or at least your version of the truth, and you can actually say things like journalists wouldn't otherwise get to say, which is one of the
Exactly.
reasons why I think we like um, uh, political comedy so much, is that they supposedly have this freedom to say what everyone else is thinking, um, even when we can't necessarily vocalize those same opinions ourselves.
Yeah,
And
and I
so,
think that's why. Yeah,
no, 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 no.
I
You
was.
can,
I was. I think that. I mean, that's why people like a lot of these TV programs where they can talk about Trump without any repercussion whatsoever because he's the president, and in other countries that would be impossible. I mean, that would in some countries you would be punishable by death for doing that. And I guess and we enjoy that luxury of pointing and laughing at the president, and we enjoy that freedom in that sense. The only problem is that when it's with an ideology that people don't agree with, it's treated a little bit differently. Um, but it's also because it's just not something that we hear as
yeah,
much anymore,
yeah,
right? But yeah, but that's sort of the weird hypocrisy that I feel. But it's hypocrisy with everything. I mean, with like even with comedians themselves, but with the people who are watching them, and it goes back to just people don't. I don't know. I mean, people will still watch Trevor Noah because he's the popular one, right? And then they laugh at it because it's it's good to laugh at it, right? Otherwise, you're the only one who's not laughing at it, and so there's a lot of that on there too. Yeah, I mean, and yeah, I don't think I had anything else to add, but
it's interesting though. You were saying that not laughing at it means you're the only one there who doesn't do it. So you do so. There's like a social element to comedy as well, that like it's not just the
yeah,
jokes that are funny to you, but it's the jokes that are also funny to the vast majority of people. So it almost might be like a self-fulfilling prophecy where like um, when Seth Meyers said when Stephen Colbert becomes super famous, and so everyone else thinks that like, oh, this person must be funny. So regardless of whether his jokes are good or bad, they just keep laughing at it. His comedy and his platform just keeps growing, and then he's allowed to kind of peddle all of these ideologies that maybe a lot of us don't agree with, but we feel compelled to agree with because everyone else around us agrees with them, or we think everyone else around us agrees with them.
exactly. And actually, this reminds me of it's just the way that people's status just affects our perceptions of them, right? I mean, I think it was like my dad. We were watching a few years ago, but we were watching the Oscars, I think, or something, and somebody. I don't know. Somebody like I think so. Oh, I think it was Clint Eastwood. I think it was the Golden Globes or something. But Clint Eastwood was reading off a teleprompter, and the teleprompter had glitched, and so he was just kind of like, and he's really old and whatever, but he was kind of just, he paused and he went, sorry, the teleprompter is a little broken. And then he was kind of caught, and then he kind of had to, and he was there. It was kind of awkward, but it was like, whatever. And my dad was like, if that was anybody else, like if that wasn't Clint Eastwood that messed up, and if it was imagine if it was some new actor just up and coming, and then and then the teleprompter messed up and he was up there, that would be perceived so differently by us. Um, than it would have been if it, yeah, because of the fact that it's Clint Eastwood, because of the fact that he's this like big Hollywood guy, um, and we can say, oh, he's old, it's okay, it's fine, um, and you could say the same thing with the Oscars with the La La Land flub, where it's like because it was two veteran actors who messed it up, that might, I mean, it was already a big deal, but it might have been even worse if it was like two new people that people hadn't really heard of. And so it's just the effect and so I would say that the same effect can be seen with comedians, where it's like a lot of, I'll watch some of these shows and like I'm very open about who I don't think is funny, no matter how mainstream. I think people should be,
Yeah,
like just because someone is popular does not mean they're funny at all. In fact, sometimes it's like an inverse correlation. But you can tell a lot of times where people will just laugh because they're in the room, or
right.
because and like I saw Hassan Minaj live once, and like I was laughing, but I'm sure if I saw that on TV, or if I saw that online, it wouldn't be the same. But there's so many other factors too, where it's like, yeah, everybody around you's laughing, you're in the room, and you're seeing the person there, and that makes you kind of want to laugh a little bit more. And so yeah. But I was actually gonna, like one of the things I love about Conan is that it's not that merely that he's not doing politics, but it's that not doing politics forces him to be more creative than he otherwise would be. And earlier in the episode, I was talking about like whether or not politics is, like, whether that's just the easy way out or not, right, for many comedians. where it's almost like the low hanging fruit in many cases. And I think like everything, it depends on the context, depends on the joke. But there is an interesting thing going on where I do feel like the comedians who are able to talk about things without discussing social issues or political issues that are on the news every day, right? It does make it seem, it does give it some, some ingenuity and some, real innovation that I, wouldn't see with other political comedians, just because I feel like with a lot of political comedy, it just seems like that morning they had read the newspaper, they'd read an article, and then they were kind of just jotting down what they thought of it, right? Just funny, impulsive thoughts
That
about it. And
that is part of, I think, why people like to do a lot of political comedy. So there's this idea that like I completely cut you off, and I'm sorry about that. But
no, no, you,
that when you do comedy, right, the jokes that are funny are the jokes that people have not heard ever.
yeah,
And so a lot of the time, doing jokes from the news or from politics came from this idea of like, people have not had a chance to digest the news yet. Let me give it to them, digest it, and let me make it funny for them.
right.
And so that, I guess, increases the funny level, I guess, of whoever the comedian is that they're able to make all of these novel jokes before other comedians get to them, because it's what's just been viewed that morning. And then you get to like this time in Trump where Trump makes the same gaffes over and over again.
Yeah.
There's not much that you can do to kind of
Right.
like change my impression of him or change how stupid I think he is
Yeah,
already.
exactly.
And that's why it kind of starts to feel hackneyed. And so when you see people like Conan do jokes that are not comical at all, but maybe just highlight some really funny things that happened in the news, which is what
Not political. Yeah.
actually comedy and politics started out as. It was just highlighting funny things that happened in the news or funny things that happened in politics. We immediately think that it's novel because, I mean, honestly, Conan it's what politics and comedy or politics and news was supposed to be, but has shifted away from since then.
Yeah, and I also think that it's because we've become so. I mean, it's impossible now to not have politics in your comedy. I mean, it's impossible. It's like SNL. Yes, I mean they did cover politics a lot, but every popular skit now is a political one.
Yeah.
Like, and I mean, it's like if you see some of the older, was it the '80s or the '90s? But like some of the older SNL skits, like Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer, just like they're just things that's like they're just so genius, but it's not something that they're just so random. Things that you wouldn't see today because political things have taken place of those things. Um, and I think a lot of it is because of the fact that we're constantly looking on social, we're constantly tapping into and keeping in touch with politics and just what's going on in the world, and like everything, there are political ads everywhere. We're constantly aware of all the issues because there's a new issue every day that we become aware about. And so it's I think maybe, and this is not backed up by anything, but I think maybe it's just harder for us to be entertained by things that aren't relevant in some way. Like when I think about Smothers Brothers, two people playing guitar on a stage, I don't know how much that can entertain people nowadays. As much as something a little bit more topical and more like, and I guess, and I'm thinking in the mainstream, because there are a lot of improv shows that happen. Like I know Ben Schwartz and Tom Middleditch, they're a great improv duo. But they're playing to audiences that are fans of comedy. They're just fans of the art of comedy.
Yeah.
And so, I think I do feel like our just technological innovations, current um, political discourse, and just how easy it is to be involved in politics, how easy it is for anybody to just to know about what's going on in the world, and to have opinions about things and say and vocalize those opinions. I think that's almost put more of more pressure onto a lot of comedians, because it's like, hey, you should be addressing this thing.
Yeah.
And you also see that with them, and even when they're not doing shows, or even when they have podcasts, where we were talking about this, off camera, I think, but with I was talking about with Joe Rogan how after that Bernie episode, Rogan's podcast essentially started as him with a bunch of friends just talking.
Yeah.
And it was very entertaining. They would talk about martial arts and whatnot. But once he started to get more popular and he started to get politicians on, and then especially after he got Bernie on, a lot of political people started to watch it. And a lot of people accuse him of like, hey, why don't you address this on your platform? You have a big platform, do this and that. Um, and then I guess from his perspective, it's like, I didn't know this was what my platform was going to be. I had no idea in the early 2000s that, like it was going to get this involved. And so there's just in general with entertainers and comedians, I think there's just more of more pressure to address these things maybe. Um, and of course it's where the money is also. I mean, people want to see these things. People are willing to give it a lot of clicks. Um, and that keeps them going, I guess.
Yeah. I, to a certain extent, I also kind of wish that comedians would use their platform better. Like when I think of people in power, I'm like, you have this, thing, like use your platform for like issues that you believe in, and they like refuse to make it political, or they refuse to make it about climate change, or they refuse to make it about things that need that attention. And I'm just kind of right now thinking, right, like should I have should I believe that I should put that kind of pressure on people like that, because these are important issues, and honestly no one listens to you unless you have that kind of platform in the first place. But if you make your platform about or not about those issues, then people suddenly accuse you of not caring.
Exactly.
It's definitely like it's a fine line to traverse and to cross, but I'm still not sure how I feel about that then.
Yeah, I mean, I think also because so much of our lives are digital, we see somebody's podcast or we see somebody's tweets, and then we assume their identity through those things, right? And it's like there's so much that there's obviously like their whole lives are within the gaps, right? And we can't fill those up. The only perception of Trevor Noah or of Hassan Minaj that we have is of this through their show,
Yeah.
right, or through their tweets. But those are never enough to give your really nuanced thoughts, right? And when people disagree on some tweet that somebody gives, a lot of times I don't take that too seriously, because it's like, everybody's going to screw up, or everybody's going to say something that somebody disagrees with, right? Like if FDR had a Twitter, he'd say some stuff that a lot of people disagree with. He would say stuff that, or if Lincoln had a Twitter, right? I mean, there would be a lot of things that we disagree with, but it's just because we're seeing our lives through, or we're seeing their lives through digital means, which only gives you certain amount of characters to convey certain things. And with comedians, like you can say the same thing, where like they just write what they think is good, and then they say it on stage, and then and who knows if it might not even have anything to do with their personal opinion about certain political issues. But because that's the only thing of them we see, we're like, oh, why don't you do this instead of what you did? But I think it's just, yeah, I mean, I think it's just there's just so much pressure as a public figure to cover certain things, especially if you're mainstream. And then we talked about last time, it's like you now, like, not only do you have the pressure of being a good entertainer, but you also have the pressure of getting people educated on certain issues just because of the way it is now, right? Where like Hassan Minaj can't screw up. I mean, no, his research can't be off, because otherwise he'll be teaching millions of people the wrong thing, or he'll
Yeah.
be, because there's so much of responsibility in his hands.
And if it gets out that it's out, then he loses all credibility as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And so so now there's this added weight, and now it's like it's with every show, right? I mean, it's with every show. Even talk shows are like that too. um where like a lot of people, I'm sure, watched Jimmy Kimmel when he was talking about his son, and was talking about, and used his son to talk about the healthcare system and all of that. I mean, a lot of people were probably watching that and had second thoughts about the healthcare, or had their thoughts challenged, um, because they saw a personal side of it, or they saw they were able to see it in a certain light from someone that they, as we talked about, trust. But we will definitely have a second part of this conversation, and we'll also have a second part to some of our other conversations. So look out for more conversations about previous topics. And again, if you have something to contribute, if you want to comment on something on the blog, then you can. It's at citizensgambit.org. We'll be posting one post for every episode, and that'll be from either Ojus or I. Ojus has done the last two posts on, I was going to say comedy and politics, on bias in the media and defunding the police. And so if you like what you are reading, then please comment on it, please, because we want to start conversations about these topics. And if you're also a fan of the channel, please subscribe to the channel, like it, like the videos, but also check us out on all of our subscription services that we're on, or not subscriptions, yeah, podcast streaming services that we're on: Stitcher, Deezer, the ones you didn't even know existed, Spotify, iTunes. We're on all of them, and so please check us out there. And stay tuned for 2 weeks from now. We'll be discussing a topic that's a little bit of a detour. So we'll see you then.